Welcome, everyone. So happy to be learning together again. And today's class is conversations on the Parashah. Each week we will have different members from the Drisha's learning community. This week we are joined by Dr. John Kelsen and Mr. Michael Bernstein. Just a couple words about how we run the class. I'll be sending everyone an invitation to become a panelist. That would allow you to show us your smiling face, and also allow you to unmute and participate actively verbally in class. You can also engage in the chat box here on Zoom, or as a comment if you're watching us live on Facebook. Dr. John Kelsen is the Drisha Chief Education Officer and previously served as the Dean at Yeshivat Chovevei Torah. Mr. Michael Bernstein works for Drisha's administrative team and is an expert on Kara'i religious text. And with that, I'll turn this to you two.
Okay, terrific. Thank you so much, Evie. Pleasure to be with you all again this afternoon or this evening. There we go. Okay, so now we're spotlighted there. So this week is Parashat Parashiyot, depending on how you think about it, Achrei-Mot Kedoshim, two Parashiyot which are linked together in sort of the liturgical calendar. They are read in the same Parashah for calendrical reasons, but perhaps also for thematic reasons. There is a relationship between these two Parashiyot. But I want to begin here with the first opening verses of Parashat Kedoshim, and I'll screen share the text, which also I see that Evie put it in the chat. If anybody wants it, and also was sent out ahead of time. Let me just open it up right here. Okay, everybody can see that. Thumbs up if that's showing. Not sure. Okay, Evie says she sees it. Sherry, you don't see it?
No, now I saw it for a second. No, I don't see it now.
Let me try again. 1 second.
Okay.
Screen sharing is paused.
Still not.
For some reason, it's not letting me do it. Maybe Evie, you could pull it up.
Okay, sure. 1 second.
So in any event, I'll start reading as Evie's pulling up the screen share. So if you have the source sheet in the chat, you can open it up there. If you have your Tanakh at home, we're in Leviticus 19:1 and 2, and the Torah tells us at the beginning of Parashat Kedoshim, "Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe lemor." Daber, there it is. Daber al kol adat b'nei Yisrael, va'amarta alehem Kedoshim tihiyu, Kedoshim tihiyu, ki kadosh ani Adonai Elohechem. And then the text goes on in this chapter, which we'll get to, with a long list of mitzvot of various sorts in various sorts addressing various parts of life. And what we want to do here this afternoon or evening with you is ask a few questions, because this chapter really raises a lot of questions. Okay, so one of the questions we'll get to in a little while is what to make of this collection of lists of mitzvot. It almost reads as a sort of scattershot, random, perhaps arbitrary collection of commandments. Is there any reason why rhyme or order wise to why some of these commandments are in this list and why others are left out? Is there any way we can understand the order of the commandments here, etc.? So we'll come back to that in a bit. But starting with these opening verses, which we just read, Daber kol adat b'nei Israel. Okay, we'll come back to that as well. This notion of these commandments, this list in specific, was said to the whole Israelite community, kol adat b'nei Israel. But then it says, "V'amartam alehem kedoshim tihiyu." Translated here as, "You shall be holy." Kedoshim tihiyu, you shall be holy. Ki kadosh ani Adonai Elohechem, for I, your God, am holy. So, Michael, we were talking about earlier this week, or maybe it was last week already. What do we make of this phrase "Kedoshim tihiyu"? Is this, and we were talking about a few possibilities. Is this some sort of, is this like a commandment? Is this like an order, a mitzvah? You shall be holy in the sense of a prescription. This is what you must do. Is it a promise? Is it is it some sort of havtacha that the Jewish people shall be holy, that they will be holy, a promise from God? Is it a prediction? Is it conditional or absolute? Is this an absolute description of some inherent state of being of corporate Israel? Or is it conditional and contingent? What do we make of this phrase Kedoshim Tihiyu? So, Michael, what do you think?
Well, I would break it up as follows, that if we just take it out of context, there are technically three possibilities. It could be a sort of prediction, like inevitably by keeping the mitzvot, because the mitzvot are of me, Hashem, you also will be like me, holy. We can split a hair between prediction and promise and say, maybe it's more assured, more of a guarantee than just I don't know what it means for God to predict something, but there is a possible distinction to be made there. But I think it's pretty clear that in context, this is the first exhortation that is sort of like the umbrella that encompasses the rest of the chapter, like and not just this chapter, but some of what follows. The repeated, the repetition of I am Hashem your God, I am Hashem your God, I am Hashem, like several times throughout this whole section of Vayikra, is all echoing back to the end of the second verse here, for I your God am holy. So it seems like this is like it definitely grammatically lends itself to a lot of productive interpretation, but on a pshat level, which is always what attracts me, it's definitely an exhortation.
Interesting. And so on the pshat level, you see it as an exhortation in the sense of kind of a command or an order, right? This is telling us what we should do.
Well, it depends. So I personally am not qualified to say whether it's its own mitzvah. That's for the sources that we'll look at to decide whether this counts as its own mitzvah. But it's like it's definitely phrased. The one it's phrased as an exhortation, not as a imperative. But that's like a very that's not that big a distinction in this case.
Right.
Like I don't even know what you do. Just say Tihiyu Kedoshim. No, it doesn't make that big a difference. So it's definitely in a way, the English translation "you shall be holy" gets around the problem by using a word that itself is kind of a little
bit ambiguous.
Yeah.
Right. Or multivalent. Right. And it's interesting that and again we'll circle back to this, I hope, but there are parallel verses here, parallel formulations, I should say. So, for example, this whole section of mitzvot, opening with the verses that we're dealing with here in 19:1 and 2, you could argue that it closes in chapter 20, verse. This is not on the source sheet, but chapter 20, verse 26. In chapter 20, verse 26, as we're sort of nearing the very end of the collection of mitzvot here, the Torah says, "V'hiyitem li kedoshim, ki kadosh ani Adonai, v'avdil etchem min ha'amim liyot li." So there, the formulation is "V'hiyitem li kedoshim," and you shall be to me holy. So it's worth considering: is there anything different? Is there any salient distinction between kedoshim to you and v'hiyitem li kedoshim? I assume, at first blush that there's no salient distinction, and they're meant to sort of just be rough analogs for each other. That's why they function as as an opening and a closing in parallel. But it is worth noting that the formulation is different. V'hiyitem li. If we scroll down in the document, in the source sheet, past source 1. We'll see, and here we're going to see this long list of mitzvot, which we have to, return to. As she's going, I'll also say that you'll see that as she's scrolling down.
Should I keep going?
Past this entire source. That they're going to stop there for number 2, please. That some of the mitzvot there end with Ani Hashem Elokeichem, and some end with Ani Hashem. Again, one could wonder without the word Elokeichem there. One could. It's worth asking: is there any distinction between those two and their function within the collection? I haven't come up with a theory yet, but maybe Michael has, or maybe someone else here during the course of our time together might generate something. But we wanted to share with you the following really intriguing midrash on this verse, and this is from the Sifra, right? The midrash halacha actually on Vayikra and on Parashah Kedoshim, and it goes as follows: Daber al kol adat b'nei Yisrael va'amarta alehem. Sort of a typo here. Va'amarta alehem kedoshim tihiyu. Melamed shehaparsha ne'emra b'hakel. Now we note that earlier in Vayikra, when even in chapters 18 or the opening of Vayikra, we have many sections of it which start with Vadaber Hashem Moshe Lemor Daber el Bnei Yisrael, speak unto Bnei Yisrael. But here in chapter 19, you have this evocative, intriguing phrase Daber el Kol Adat Bnei Yisrael, the whole congregation of the entire congregation, the whole Edah of Bnei Yisrael. What are we to make of that? So the midrash here says Melamed Parsha Ne'emar B'Hakel. This teaches that this section was presented in a great congregation. I don't think the reference here, although Michael, maybe you disagree, is to mean say the Hakel ceremony per se, right? The formal Hakel ceremony described in Deuteronomy. I think it just merely means that this passage was recited, by something like the Hakel ceremony, right? From God to Moshe, and then into the entire people, right? Just like Hakel has like the king reciting the Torah or part of the Torah to the entire people. Now, why was it so important that this be recited b'Hakel? Because, how do they translate here? Most of the major tenets of Torah are inherent in it, are in it, are somehow connected perhaps to whatever is articulated here. Okay, we're going to come back to this again when we try to understand, what to make of the content of the chapter and what do we mean by Rov Gufei Torah. Continuing on, Kedoshim Tihiyu, Pirushim Tihiyu. This gets to the sort of a definition, if you will, or a kind of rendering of the term Kedoshim Tihiyu. What does that mean to be holy? You shall be Pirushim, separate. And we'll come back to that again in a few moments when we speak about, for example, Rashi, Ramban. What do they mean by Pirushim? Pirushim from what? But here we get to the kicker for our purposes. For right now, I mean, Ki kadosh ani Hashem Elokeichem, because I Hashem your God am holy. Right. So you know that the verse has a few sections. Kedoshim Tihiyu, we call that section A for our purposes, and then Ki kadosh ani Hashem Elokeichem, for I Hashem your God am holy. What's the relationship between those parts of the verse? Kedoshim Tihiyu, Ki kadosh ani Hashem Elokeichem. And maybe here I'll actually, I'll ask, can I see the, just if I can see everybody, but I'll ask everybody here. Here we go. I'll ask everybody on the call, what do you make of this? I see a lot of familiar names here and faces. What do you make of the connection between the first part, Kedoshim Tihiyu, and the second part, Ki kadosh ani Hashem Elokeichem? What's the relationship between A and B there? I'm asking primarily. I'm asking Sharon, Zella, and Aviva, and Evie, and Noah, and Francine, and Jennifer, and everyone else, and Michael. You and I have talked about this. Well, I'm also want to hear if you've had any thoughts on it. But let's see what others have to say first. Just feel free to unmute and just go for it.
What struck me is reading all this now together is that it's just examples of what to people who might not have known anything about what holiness meant. It might have been a completely foreign concept. And God is saying, be holy. And here's what I mean by being holy. You can be holy. There will be opportunities in absolutely everything you're doing. And that's how it struck me now reading it.
So that's really interesting, Sherry. So Sherry, when I'm hearing Sherry say, tell me if I'm hearing you correctly, is that first of all, the whole Kol Adat B'nai Israel thing, right, might be saying, listen, I'm speaking to all of you in all of your life circumstances. Maybe I'm editorializing here, Sherry, I'm adding a little bit. In all of your life circumstances, at whatever level of familiarity you are with the concept of holiness, with how to enact holiness in your life, and I'm giving you sort of a broad introduction, right? Here's Rov Gufei Torah. Here's sort of giving you sort of a broad framework, or with many opportunities. And then, sure, the part I didn't get from you, though, I didn't catch, is how does that relate to the end of the verse? Ki kadosh ani Hashem lokechem, because I Hashem, ki kadosh, whatever ki means, for I Hashem God am holy. What's the point of that, of the ending of the verse? What does that add?
I think it just means that God is just supremely, totally holy. And by us trying to emulate that and trying to see in every small aspects of our lives, it will accumulate and culminate in something approaching the holiness of God.
Wow, amazing. That's a beautiful interpretation. So again, what I'm hearing you say is that Ki kadosh ani Hashem lokechem, right, means it's kind of like I Hashem am the aggregate. My holiness is the aggregate. Maybe it's the sum greater than, right? It's the result which is greater than just the sum, of its parts. But of the aggregate of, or above that, of holiness, right? Capital H holiness, capital Kuf holiness. And all these other different expressions of holiness kind of like emerge out of my absolute holiness, I God, and partake of parts of it, or something along those lines. That's really interesting. Thank you. Yeah, go. Who's speaking?
Aviva.
Hey, Aviva. Hey. Okay.
Yeah. You mentioned my name, so you challenged me to think.
Okay.
Well, I've been studying with Genesis with Rabbi Silber, and a lot of talk about the covenant. So I see this with the focus not on God's holiness, but on the expectation, the obligation of the people's holiness. That if you want a relationship with me, you need to practice holiness.
Terrific. Okay, thank you. So that's a very different angle, which I think is also a powerful one, right? So Aviva suggests, Kedoshim to you shall be holy. Why? Because if we're going to be in covenant together, if we're going to be in a relationship together, and I am kadosh, right? Then you also need to be kadosh. I, the holy God, can only be in covenant with a people who themselves are holy. Interesting. And by the way,
I also seen the comment in the chat.
Yes. So hold on one second, Evie, on the chat. I just want to say, and then I saw Zella, and then we'll get to the chat. There's something I want to note, which again well, maybe now actually is a good time to circle back to this, Michael. Maybe I'll go out of order for 1 second if that's okay. But even if you scroll down to the course from David Tzvi Hoffman later in I think it's. So now I'm looking at the screen here, so I don't have it in front of me. But I think keep going down. You'll see the numbered sources. But Rabbi David Tzvi Hoffman, who was a German, I think he is late 19th, kind of like beginning of 20th century, German Orthodox scholar. And do you see, if you keep going down to where it says David Tzvi Hoffman, or Tzvi Hoffman, there you go, number 4. Thank you, right there. So, and anyway, when he's opening up his discussion of Sefer Vayikra, the book of Leviticus, he references the verse I have in bold on the screen in the second paragraph there. And I'm sorry, it's in Hebrew, I'll translate, but from Exodus 19, by the sort of Sinai covenant. So God there says in Exodus 19, I'm just opening up in my hard copy here, my Tanakh, verses 5 and 6, God says, listen, if you listen to me, if you heed my word and keep my covenant, and you will be sigula to me, unique or special, treasured among the nations, for the whole world is mine. And then listen to this: this is a familiar verse, and maybe many of you may know this verse by heart. And you shall be to me, I'll say again, Mamlechet Kohanim V'Goy Kadosh, a kingdom of priests and a holy nation, something along those lines. Mamlechet Kohanim V'Goy Kadosh, different ways of rendering that line, even different ways of sort of punctuating it. These are the words which you shall speak to Israel, God says to Moshe. So Rabbi Hoffman notes that in that initial sort of covenantary formula, the promise is that if you will heed my words, right, if you'll keep to your side of the covenant, then you will be for me a mamlechet kohanim and a goy kadosh. Look at the word kadosh there. And what he basically notes, I'll say really in summary, and Michael, feel free to if I'm missing something you want to be given expression to, just jump on in here, right? He says you can understand the basic flow and structure of the book of Leviticus at large, as playing out the two parts of this verse in Exodus 19, right? Or I'll say it differently, right? As the unfolding, the implementation of the Sinaitic covenant, or parts of the Sinaitic covenant. If you shall be to me a mamlechet kohanim, so a priestly nation. And if you note that until now in Sefer Vayikra, we've basically been dealing with Torat Kohanim, basically been dealing with the laws of the priest, the laws of sacrifices, the priestly law, basically. And it's a description of how to build have the tabernacle already built, but functioning as performed by the priest, right? And that's an sort of an expression of relationship with the holy. But then starting basically around Kedoshim Tihiyu and going forward, and certainly later into the book of Vayikra, you get to the Goy Kadosh, where the people at large are enacting holiness qua a holy people. So not just a priest, and not just in terms of purity and impurity, but also in terms of holiness. So this is actually a really beautiful observation by Rav David Tzvi Hoffman here, I think, that the book Vayikra can be understood as a structure, right, from like chapters 1 through around 17, or maybe including 18. Maybe 18 is a segue, dealing with Torat Mamlechet Kohanim, and then from our where we're standing now, chapter 19 on, we're getting to the Goy Kadosh part, right? The holiness notion, the holy nation, the way of enacting that in terms of being a holy people. So I mentioned this just because Aviva referenced the notion of covenant and the idea that if God is holy and you're going to be in covenant with God, you have to be holy also. But there's also another piece of the covenant angle that I wanted to mention at this point. Michael, am I missing anything, or do you want to add anything? Or
well, you know what I wanted to talk about this Rav David Tzvi Hoffman. So can I jump in with that now?
Yeah, go right ahead. And then
Right.
I don't want to forget that Zella had a comment, and also I know that Evie said someone was in the chat, so we won't forget. Okay.
So Rav David Tzvi Hoffman is writing in this context in the late 1800s. And he's the author of, among other things, a book called Ra'ayot Machriot Neged Wellhausen, which I think is not its original title because it was written in German, but it basically means robust counterclaims against Wellhausen, because Wellhausen was one of these the first generation of what they call source critics or documentary hypothesis scholars who tried to cut up the Torah texts and see, can we rearrange them to see different original source documents here? A totally secular approach to the text with somewhat of what was trendy at the time, scholarly eye towards taking any text, regardless of perceived sanctity, and doing this, any historical text, and doing this sort of analysis. And so Rav David Tzvi Hoffman is very self-aware in what he's writing when he's talking in his books against these kind of ideas. So it's in this context that we have to acknowledge that Kedoshim Tihiyu forms the the standout chapter of what those documentary hypothesis scholars later came to call the Holiness Code, or the H document. And then they got to argue amongst themselves whether the H document came first and was joined with the priestly document, or the priestly document came first and was joined with the H. They can argue about that, whatever. But at this point, because first the priestly document was conjectured, which would have been what's traditionally known, for the most part, I should say, what's traditionally known already. Leviticus means the book of Levite, the Levite tribe, right? And traditionally we call it Torah Kohanim already, not just the first part of the book, but the entire Sefer is referred to by the preponderance of mitzvot it has in it that relate to the priestly service and priestly purity and things like that. So when in about, I saw this this week that it was 1877 is the first time that the Holiness Code, so to speak, is conjectured by one of these scholars. And Rav David Zvi Hoffman neatly steps in, and in explaining his own point that Rabbi Kelsen already explained on its surface level, which is in itself a pretty good insight. He points out that yes, the traditional name of the Sefer is the Torah of the Kohanim, that it is a priestly book. And I'll translate here part of just freehand from the first paragraph, because for the most part, it deals with exhortations and teachings to all of Israel under the rubric of, or in the vein of, the Torah commandment to be a kingship, a kingly dynasty of priests. How to engage in closeness to God, and that Kedusha, God being separated from the profane earth or earthly level plane of reality, is what we are emulating when we try to cleave closer to that higher level by getting ourselves further away from the earthly level of reality with these assorted laws, these very assorted laws that comprise the chapter of Kedoshim to you and onward. But when you look in his proof text, you see that what he's doing there is very carefully quoting something that's from Exodus 19, which has nothing to do with the conjectured P document, which has nothing to do with the conjectured H document, and says straight out that when God is speaking to the assembly of the children of Israel, he's talking to what is supposed to be considered a priestly, kingly dynasty nation, and a holy nation, a separated nation. And so in making this insightful point, he's actually sort of neatly dispensed with one of the key arguments that these people were making about a so-called holiness code, because it actually does appear to be integrated not just into Sefer Vayikra, but into the entire fabric of Chumash.
Right.
Back to you, John.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I just wanted to note, and then we'll go to Zella, and then whatever question was in the chat or comment in the chat, is that I remember years ago hearing the name of Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik, who spent time in Berlin, maybe after Dr. Hoffman's time, but anyway, that he explained, when people ask, what's the relationship? How can you call Leviticus Torah Kohanim if only the first half has to do with Kohanim, and the second half, which we're dealing with now, is about, prima facie not priestly material? So he also pointed to this verse of Atem Tiyu Mamlechet Kohanim V'Goy Kadosh, and he said, it's as you just said, Michael, that this is meant to be sort of a priestly nation at large, and therefore even the second half of the book is talking to Kohanim. It's a Torah of the Kohanim. It's not the literal sort of Aaronide Kohanim or priests, but it is the people Israel, all of whom are imbued with some Kohanic status, all of whom are in a sense Kohanim. So therefore, you can call the whole book Torah Kohanim. So I remember that after you and I were discussing this with Rabbi Zvi Hoffman, and it's different than Rabbi Zvi Hoffman's point, of course, but it's intriguingly, references back to the same verse over here. Anyway, Zella, you wanted to say something quite a while ago. Thanks for your patience.
Zella, just unmute first.
Sorry.
Perfect.
I'm constantly clicking. The thing that this always strikes me is that the point of this, this constant repetition of I am holy,
it's like saying that you can't take anything and separate it into its parts. It's one big idea. This idea of how we are to act and how we are to think and be. And in the smallest little thing, weights and measures is as important as anything that the Kohanes are doing in, or the Holy of Holies, that it's one big picture, and that the holiness is in the very small details as well as the very large ones. And I just feel like whenever I read this Parsha, that's the idea that I feel is coming out. Maybe it's what I see into it more than what it's trying to say, but the priest, that it's all one big picture. And no matter who you are and what status and what level, you are part of this holiness and have to act accordingly.
No, I think that's really an important insight. And actually, maybe even you can scroll up to source 3 right now as we're talking, please.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Source 3.
That's what I was thinking just now. Great.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm going to say something, Michael, quickly, and then feel free to take it over. But I just want to say that when I saw the Rav Lichtenstein Zella, when he gave us talk once about this Parsha, he made your point, right? Or you made his point, meaning that the point that one thing that you walk away from this, the Midrash in front of us, the beginning of it, right? But also the structure of the chapter is that this apparent mishmash, an intermingling of types of mitzvot. Often we think of mitzvot, interpersonal mitzvot, ben adam lachavero, and mitzvot which are ben adam lamakom, sort of human, divine oriented mitzvot. By the way, side point, I'm not always sure that's the most apt heuristic or apt sort of schema or binary for thinking away how the Torah is thinking about mitzvot. But anyway, maybe we'll come back to that later today, maybe not. But that they're all implicated, one within the other, and they form a greater whole together, right? And that if you're fulfilling only the sort of, as he put it, the human divine mitzvot and not the others, then it's not going to work, and also vice versa. And I'd say also, by the way, literarily, that there is within the chapter here, 19 and into 20. You also see some resonance between the mitzvot. For example, the same chapter speaks about pe'ah, leaving over pe'ah of the field, pe'ah the corners of the field, as well as the pe'ah leaving over the pe'ot of the body, of the hair, right, on one's head, and it puts those two. I mean, I'm a little bored about that, but that's not the point. The point is that that it puts them into some sort of like literary relationship with each other, and maybe there's more to it than just sort of that they sound, it's the same term, right, that the mishmash, right, indicates that they're of a piece and they speak to one another. But Michael, why did you want to come to this midrash right now?
So before I jump to the expansion that Rabbi Levi makes on the what we saw already in this Sifra, I just wanted to my personal take on the chapter is it reminds me of, there's an old joke about how the chapters of Tehillim are unrelated to one another, and in Mishlei the verses are unrelated to one another, and sometimes in Eov the words are unrelated to one another. But in this chapter of Vayikra, it really is almost like that Mishlei thing. Like you can go, it's almost like you get whiplash sometimes from one verse to the next. Sometimes with even you hit the centerpiece of a verse at the Etnachta, and then boom, you're in an entirely different kind of law for the rest of the verse. It really is disorienting almost, the sense you get going through it. But when you take it as a whole, and as Rabbi Levi is going to observe in this passage, you see that, the other thing was, Tuluyin ba is a really interesting phrasing because it means can be hung on it. And so you almost picture it like this chapter of Vayikra has all of these convenient hooks hanging out of it, so to speak, that you can attach anything to that's a mitzvah from the whole rest of Torah. And Rabbi Levi proceeds to do just that, and I think gets 8 out of 10 pretty good in finding the 10 commandments in this one chapter. If you want to present it, or should I read it?
Go ahead.
Okay, so first we cite Parashah Zonem Rabbi Hakel Mipnei Sharov Gufei Torah Tzliyin Ba. The several major principles of Torah can be attached to this section. Rabbi Levi Amar Mipnei She'aseret Hadibrot Klulin B'tocha. Rabbi Levi points out that you can find all, it's like a game. It's like a learning, an insightful game. You can find all 10 of the 10 commandments contained within this one section. Anochi Hashem Elokecha, from the beginning of the Aseret Dibrot, Uktiv Hacha Ani Hashem Elokechem. That one's pretty straightforward. Both are saying I am Hashem. Lo Yihiyelecha, the commandment against idols. Uktiv Hacha Velo Hemasecha Ta'asu Lachem. That one's also a typo because that one should be a hey because it's referring to not real gods. But that's also very straightforward. No idols, no idols. Lo Tisa Uktiv Hacha Velo Tishavu B'Shmi. Don't take the name of God in a false oath, and don't swear with my name, presumably illicitly or in an inappropriate way. Those two are also very straightforwardly the exact same commandment to keep the Sabbath. Again, very straightforward. You have the commandment to honor your mother and father, and here you have the commandment to be reverential, or let's go with reverential of your mother and father. This one's a little bit of a stretch because one of them is active and one of them is passive. The commandment not to murder and the commandment not to, I suppose you would say, be a passive accessory to an unprosecuted murder, to not stand idly by while violence is being perpetrated and do nothing about it. This is again very straightforward. This is not from the 19th chapter, but this is again all straightforwardly part of what this section, whether it's the from commentators or the modern commentators who couldn't care less about the from side of things, everyone basically agrees that this section goes through the mid 20s chapters of Vayikra. So again, you have, the commandment against adultery and the punishment for adultery is enumerated here. Lo tidnovu ktiv hacha lo tidnovu. Depending how you interpret that line in the Aseret HaDibrot, there are many traditional commentators who say it refers to kidnapping, but on a straightforward level, it certainly seems like both are being listed together. Don't steal, don't steal. This is fairly straightforward of a parallel. Don't bring false witness versus don't go around telling exaggerated gossip tales. Okay, that's almost, it's close enough. This one I think is the weakest, but what are you going to do? Lo tachmod is kind of its own thing.
We'll just translate that for us.
The equivalency being made here is that the essence of not coveting or being envious or desirous of someone else's possessions or life circumstances is that instead you should feel an unconditional love for your fellow rather than that. And so that's as far as I wanted to discuss it. But this is like a masterful piece of midrash where you come out of it very much convinced that this is not an accident. This is on purpose, and there must be something here. And that's the best kind of midrash to me, because I like to be convinced by my midrash. But there is definitely something about these chapters in Vayikra that seem to be not. I don't know what word is the best. A digest, a microcosm. Some sort of shorthand version of what it is to be a Jew and to be separate from everyone else.
And also, I mean, so, and also, I have a few little comments, but I guess the biggest thing I wanted to say is that this notion that our section over here is echoing, right? Or in some way, it's, I don't know what the word is paralleling, evoking, but in power, something like all those things, the 10 Commandments, maybe that's related to this idea of, Rav Drisha Hoffman. I don't mean in the sense that structure of Leviticus is following after Temtilu Melech HaKohanim Gai Kadosh, but the idea that our parshiot here are, evoking, right, that section of Exodus, right, of Exodus 19, and you have therefore like the exhortation in the beginning, be a holy people, and then how so? And you have the Ten Commandment version of that in Exodus, and you have some sort of evocation of that here, although with mutatis mutandis, with the differences. I just want to one thing I would say is that maybe I have to look at this list more carefully. Is that perhaps exactly in those places where it seems like a forced analogy or a forced evocation. Let's say the last one, lo tachmod and v'ahavtecha kamocha. Maybe there's more there. Maybe it requires us to look more deeply. I wonder, for example, just looking today, lo tachmod, right? So don't covet. Maybe that means like you're happy that the other person has what they have. And if you look at the way the Ramban and his Kuni understand loving v'ahavtecha kamocha, they understand that to mean, or at least part of what it means is that you wish for good things to go towards right? To go towards your fellow, towards the other, without being sort of jealous, right? And hurt that their status is greater than your own. So that actually sounds kind of like this, right? Lo tachmod and v'ahavtecha kamocha. So I just something maybe in the moments where it seems like a kvetch, it invites us to sort of focus on that dynamic, and maybe there's something more there. But yes, definitely a really interesting midrash. Evie, what was in the chat a while ago? I can't see it at this moment.
I don't know if
I
it's
think
still.
Anne was saying she.
No, it was just. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Michael.
I think Anne was raising her hand.
Oh, so let me just say, now I see that Noah wrote with holiness as something set apart. Be weirdos and everything you do to people look and say, look at those distinct folks, the way that we are simply recognizing distinct and discrete deity. Interesting. So sometimes the idea of holy, I'm sure I'm getting it correctly, Noah, feel free to clarify, but it sounds like you're saying like, just like God is different, right? Is ultimately different and distinct and discrete. Sometimes some of these laws are about being different, maybe even for difference's sake, right? So that there's a separation and discreteness. We've dealt on a sense of the connection between separation and holiness. So wait, Anne, you had something to add before?
Yeah, I found that the connection to the Ten Commandments jumping out at me just from the text, and I appreciated the midrash on it. But I think the difference is that here in Vayikra, it's in the plural. And so it's very much about creating a national character. I mean, I think this is the way Rav Hirsch explains it too. So that the fine distinctions between, does this one really work, is part of the way you would describe it when you're talking about not personal feelings about how I accomplish this one commandment, but how we create a society that reflects God's holiness, because the relationship between you should be holy because Hashem, your God, is holy, creates a relationship that we mirror in creating the nation that way.
Thank you. Since we have sort of gotten into the content or of the chapter itself just now, and maybe I'll circle back to Michael, if it's okay. I'm actually going to share my understanding of an insight that I got from you, and then tell me if I'm hearing you correctly, or if that's okay. But we were talking about
Sure.
this, in preparation, the structure of the chapter, and I think Michael said something, at least to me, is very intriguing. I think what Michael noted was that perhaps this sort of, earlier you said just now, whiplash, right? That you read the chapter and it seems to be all over the place in terms of categories and types of mitzvot. It gives the reader sort of whiplash if you're trying to, imagine like a structure and sort of imagine like a chart with like different demarcating different types of mitzvot. So maybe in part, maybe what I thought Michael said in our preparation was that maybe the significance of that mishmash and whiplash is intentional in a way, right? And maybe instead of trying to solve it by trying to search for a structure, which some have tried to do, from the Rishonim, on, perhaps actually the lack of structure, the sense that it's all over the place, right, is exactly the point. Meaning all over the place in two senses. One, textually, it's all over the map in terms of types of mitzvot, but two, it's all over the place in terms of our lives, right? That like it says to the reader, "You shall be holy," and it gives you sort of this like snapshots: holy here, holy there, holy here, holy there, here, all over the place, right? Hashem is here, Hashem is where, Hashem is holy everywhere, right? And so too shall you be, and therefore the structure sort of evokes or encourages one to have an experience of disorientation or experience of not messiness, but sort of overflow. It can't be held in by categories because it's everywhere. It affects your entire life. This call to be holy. Kedoshim tihiyu ki kadosh ani Hashem Elokechem, in every aspect of your life, on every plane. That's what I heard you say. I'm not sure if that's what you were saying, Michael. Please let me know. But even if you weren't saying it, I will say that I think that that's a really intriguing reading and a helpful one, because it obviates the need to look for a structure. It actually embraces what seems to be the lack of structure, and therefore, and B, makes actually a powerful statement about like that's sort of the Torah's poetics, right? The Chumash's poetics, that it speaks in a way which is meant to correlate with that which it's speaking about. Right? If it's speaking about the tightly ordered and orchestrated temple rituals, it'll speak in that way. But when it wants to say to you, be holy in sort of a way which spills over to your entire life, in all ways, back and forth and up and down, it writes it in that way. Michael, over to you. Did I get you correctly?
Okay. Well, I will certainly disavow that last part, because I don't know anything about how God chooses to write different kinds of stuff. But the first part was pretty much on the way that I would put it is, I started with the question, like, if we assume that this section is the big list of things to do that make it that Kedoshim to you, well, then why is like not getting a tattoo or not this or that, why is that Kedoshim to you, but some mitzvah that's not on the list and appears somewhere else in Chumash, that's not Kedoshim to you? So once you have the commentaries that are all pointing out that this is in some way supposed to be a microcosm of all of Torah, whether it's the Aseret HaDibrot as a representation of all of Torah, or whether it's talking about Rov Gufei Torah, all these major principles of Torah, that the mishmash suddenly seems more like you're in a room and there's post-its all over all of the walls, and on each post-it is written one of these hundreds and hundreds of mitzvahs, and you just walk up to one section and you look and you look and you look and you look, and these are all ways that you can be holy. They're not the only ways you can be holy, but these are the ones that are listed. And then there's all kinds of grist for the commentary and exegetical note to talk about why are these the ones that are selected, because it surely is not to say that the other mitzvot that are not represented here are not also representations of godliness. But the idea that we have these seemingly arbitrarily arranged, sometimes very disorientingly arranged commandments listed under this heading of being holy, it just suggested to me that it's very much not to make it limited like a prat to this chapter, right? This section of Vayikra. It's not like the secular scholars would say that this is the things to do to be holy. This is the holiness code, right? All of Torah is the holiness code. All of Vayikra is Torah Kohanim. And this is just the part that occurs next to the most famous exhortation to be holy. And I think it is nice that it seems to be a mix of all different kinds of mitzvot, whether it's between humans and God or humans and one another, one kind of person and another kind of person, two people who are on the same societal level. and seeming a mix of what we would call chukim, these inexplicable mitzvot, with things that are very straightforward, like don't kill and don't trip blind people. Like all of these things go together in this one batch, and the disorientation is like, it's not a bug, it's a feature. It's telling you all of this that seems so different. All of this is holiness.
Right, exactly. Not a bug, but a feature, exactly. So I think, you know, people, if there's maybe, right, one thing to walk away with from today, I think that idea is an interesting sort of strategy for thinking about the chapter and what's included, not so much what's included and what's not included, but you know, what to make of the sort of disorienting effect of reading through it, the chapter, and I should say the section. I want to circle back now, and Evie, if you can go back up to source number 2, please. To that midrash we started reading from the Sifra. This midrash was from a Yikra Rabbah just now, but okay, and then as we go, yeah, so where the cursor is now, remember we had said Ki Kadosh Ani Hashem Elokeichem, and that's how we got off onto this conversation, right? What's the relation between the exhortation to be holy ourselves and the notion that God is holy? So look what the midrash here says. I wanted to make sure to share this with you tonight. Ki Kadosh Ani Hashem Elokeichem, Lomar. This is to say. Right? And maybe what it means is like the inclusion of this latter part of the verse, Ki Kadosh Ani Hashem Elokeichem, is meant to say the following: Im, say, I don't know, Mekadshim atem atmechem. I'll go with that for now. If you sanctify and hallow yourselves, Ma'aleh ani aleichem. Now I'm going down. Evie, Ma'aleh ani aleichem. I will render it unto you. Ki'ilu, it as if. You can stop there, please. As if kidashtem oti. As if you have sanctified me, as if you had made me holy, me God. And if you, in the the converse, if you do not sanctify and hallow yourselves, it's as if lo kidashtem oti, as if you have not hallowed. Okay, so so that Israel's hallowing, Israel's act of sanctifying God, is contingent upon Israel's self-sanctification, Israel making itself holy. Kedoshim tihiyu, you shall be holy. Ki kadosh, almost like in order that I, Hashem, your God, right, shall have been made holy by you. And I say that in that funny way, have been made holy by you, because then it goes on to say something. The midrash offers another interpretation, which is actually much more radical. Okay, now it offers it by saying we're not saying this, but nonetheless it brings it up by means of dismissing it. It says as follows: O eino omer ella, or maybe actually what it means, the verse is something I'm going to say more radical. I'm going to put that in. Im mekadshim atem oti, im makdishim, atem oti, hareini mekudash. Ve'im lav eini mekudash. Maybe what it means is, if you sanctify me, I am holy, but if not, I am not holy. Maybe that's what the verse means. Maybe that's what you would have thought. Right? I'm only holy if you make me holy. Now the Midrash is going to reject that idea and says, no, Tamul Amar Ki Kadosh Ani B'Kushati Ani. Says the verse, no, I am holy as an absolute state of being. Vein Mekadshimoti, vein Ein Mekadshimoti. Whether or not you sanctify me. Now that hava mina, that rejected thought is really interesting, actually, right? The Midrash,
it's bad.
Huh?
It's bad. It's terrible syntax, but it's definitely something that you can tell that they were worried. Somebody's going to come along and try to twist this and say some missionary from some other religion is going to look at this verse and wave it at us and say, "Oh, your God is only holy if you make yourselves holy," and then you calmly explain, Ki Kadosh Ani, this is not something that's dependent on us. What we do is dependent on it.
Right, but actually, brother, it's not your God only holy if you sanctify yourselves.
You sanctify him, right?
Yeah, sanctify God, right? And that's that I thought was kind of intriguing. Yeah, so maybe they're afraid someone's gonna twist it. But the thought is very. I just think that the thought is very intriguing. It's almost, it almost is well, it's modern in a sense, right? This idea that that God's holiness only exists, God only exists as sort of this holy being on account of the people's sanctifying God, right? And sort of, creating that holy God. And if not, then God is, as it were, not holy. But that idea is rejected here, of course. And instead, what's embraced is the more limited relationship, which is that if you are sanctify yourselves, then it's as if you have sanctified me. But if you have not sanctified yourselves, as if you have not sanctified me. It's a very interesting midrash. I want to say, by the way, that with regards to the contingency factor or contingency notion, that we asked at the very beginning, is Kedoshim to you some sort of, is it an exhortation? Is it merely an exhortation? Or is it some sort of prediction or promise? And another way of getting at a similar point is it absolute or contingent? So the Haftorah for, as I go to some of my Haftorah students, the Haftorah for Kedoshim taken from, at least the Ashkenazic tradition, taken from Amos, chapter 9. Just pulling it out over here. So the Haftorah reads as follows. It starts by saying as follows: Halo kivnei ushiyim atem li b'nei Israel, no Adonai. Are you, Israel, not unto me, just like the Kushiyim? I hear the translation I have here says, Kusha's Ethiopia, like the Ethiopians. Halo et Yisrael halitim et Mitzrayim. I brought Israel out of Egypt. Ufilishtim Kaftor. But I also brought the Philistines from Kaftor, and Aram Mikir, and the Arameans from Kir, and it goes on, as if to say that Israel's status as the Am Segula, as like the treasured, unique nation, the only ones who were sort of redeemed out of slavery or taken out of, it's actually, no, it's not true at all, right? That Israel, God has taken other nations out of their places, and Israel's special status is, challenged here. Maybe it's challenged when they are not keeping, to the covenant, to the prophet's liking, and goes back again to Exodus 19. But in Exodus 19, they say, if you listen to, right, my word, and it'll be to me a Am Segula, then you'll be to me Tiuli Malachet Kohanim V'Goy Kadosh. And if, and only if, because if not, then maybe not. And that assumedly is at least one reason why this Haftorah was chosen as the text we read in parallel to Parashat Kedoshim. At least that's one possibility I would want to raise. So maybe the choice of Haftorah is functions as some sort of interpretation of sorts of that phrase Kedoshim Tihiyu. Sherry, I think you wanted to say something.
Yeah, Rabbi, along the same lines, I want to, maybe this points out, well, where are the Plishtim now? Where are the other nations that I may have brought out, like you? If you're still here, maybe that's why, because you were, it's only by virtue of the fact that we're still trying to make ourselves a holy nation every day in every way.
Interesting.
John,
right.
I want to.
Yeah, go ahead.
I want to just read the last line of the source that's still up on the screen, because I think that it's a good summation of, at the beginning we said try to draw a distinction between a prediction or a promise.
Yeah.
I don't like the way they translated it here, so I'll translate it differently. Abba Shaul Omer Pamalia Lamelech Uma'ala Liot Mechakel Melech or Machkel Melech. When you are the king's retinue, which we B'nai Israel are to Hashem, there's nothing to do but follow the king. You have to go where the king is going. So if God is holy, there's nothing to be done. Because by definition we are his nation, we follow in the footsteps, and by definition those are holy. Those are holiness.
Really interesting. That's interesting reading. I was assuming when I read it to myself a different sort of spin, but I think I like yours better, actually, right? If we're God's entourage, then entourage follows the person they're following, right?
Yeah, I think that's what the phrasing Ma'aleha is getting at.
Yeah.
What else could you possibly do other than follow the king?
That's could it possibly be? Okay, so I think we're going to stop there, but just to summarize, what we did, obviously there's much more to talk about, but his opening, we tried to talk about the entire chapter in a sense by virtue of getting, into the opening verses. But, you read this passage, speak to Kol Adap in Israel, said Bahakel, clearly is of immense significance. We tried to articulate some possibilities of, what its significance is, an introduction of the idea of holiness, Mamlechet, Kohen V'Goy Kadosh. Actually, that may account for the structure of all of this, the whole entire book of Leviticus, according to Rabbi Tzvi Hoffman. We tried to understand the relation between the phrase, Kedoshim to you and Ki Kadosh Ani Hashem Elokechem, right? Not to mention, what does Kedoshim to you itself mean? Is it an exhortation? Is it an order? Is it a promise? Is it a prediction? What is it exactly? And we raised some possibilities as to some sort of counting, which we all did this together, all of us, right? And accounting for the apparent, mishmash and potpourri of mitzvot in this chapter. Perhaps this idea, perhaps the idea of is actually that it is all over the place, right? Because that is where the call to be holy is. It's all over the place. As the Midrash says, if Kedoshim Tiyu, Ki Kadosh Ani Hashem Elokechem, if we're to walk with God, and if God is holy, then what else could we possibly do but try to be holy as well? And that would be the call for the Parsha. Okay, so the rest is the commentary. The rest requires further study, but we hope that this hour together has sparked some thoughts and deepened your understanding of the Parsha, maybe inspired you to go a little deeper. Continue studying this week, and and that's our goal in these sessions. So thank you all. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Evie. Thanks everybody for being with us.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kelsen, and thank you, Mr. Bernstein. Thank you also to all our participants, not only here on Zoom, but also watching us live on Facebook. Just a few announcements. Next week, in this class, we will hear from Rabbanit Lasarna and Rabbanit Sarah Walkenfeld on Parashat Emor, so I hope to see you there. Our deadline for our summer Kollel programs is approaching fast, so apply for them at kollel.drisha.org. We also have plenty classes happening this month for both adults and for younger girls, with even more classes starting next week. So our classes are on Torah, Mishnah, Talmud, you name it. So feel free to register and find more information at drisha.org. And thank you so much, and I'll see you next time. Lehitraot.